Marcus Thompson had been serving his country for 12 years. At 34, he wore his uniform with pride every single day. The dark green fabric with its sharp creases and polished brass buttons represented more than just clothing to him. It represented honor, duty, and sacrifice. His father had worn the same uniform, and his grandfather before that. The Thompson family had a long tradition of military service. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus was returning from a 2-week training exercise in the mountains. He was exhausted, hungry, and looking forward to seeing his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. The bus ride back to the city had taken 6 hours, and his stomach was growling loudly. He decided to stop at a small diner near the bus station to grab a quick meal before heading home. The diner looked welcoming from the outside. It had red and white checkered curtains in the windows and a sign that read, "Betty's Home Cooking, All Welcome." Marcus pushed open the glass door, and a small bell chimed above his head. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air. There were about 15 tables scattered throughout the small restaurant, most of them empty since it was mid-afternoon. Marcus chose a table near the window where he could watch the street outside. He placed his military cap on the table and looked around for a server. The diner seemed cozy and comfortable, with old photographs on the walls and soft music playing in the background. He was looking forward to a hot meal and maybe a piece of pie. A young waitress with blonde hair tied in a ponytail approached his table. She looked to be in her early 20s and wore a pink uniform with a white apron. Her name tag read Jessica. She walked up to Marcus with a friendly smile, but when she noticed his military uniform, her expression changed completely. "What can I get you?" Jessica asked, but her voice was cold and unfriendly. Marcus noticed the change in her tone but decided to ignore it. Maybe she was just having a bad day. "I'd like the meatloaf special with mashed potatoes, please," Marcus said politely. "And a cup of coffee, if you don't mind." Jessica wrote down his order without looking at him. "Anything else?" she asked sharply. "No, that's all." "Thank you," Marcus replied, still trying to be friendly despite her attitude. Jessica walked away without another word. Marcus waited patiently, checking his phone for messages from his family. Emma had sent him a drawing she made at school, and Sarah had texted that she was making his favorite dinner for when he got home. These simple messages made him smile and helped him forget about the waitress's strange behavior. 20 minutes passed, and Marcus still hadn't received his coffee. He looked around and saw Jessica serving other customers who had arrived after him. She brought them drinks, took their orders, and even chatted pleasantly with some of them. Marcus began to feel uncomfortable. He waved politely to get her attention, but Jessica pretended not to see him. Another 15 minutes went by. Marcus watched as the customers at 2 other tables received their meals, ate, and left. His stomach was now cramping from hunger, and he was getting concerned about the time. He needed to catch the next bus home or he would be very late. Finally, Marcus stood up and walked to the counter where Jessica was wiping down some glasses. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I ordered about 35 minutes ago. Could you please check on my order?" Jessica looked at him with obvious annoyance. "We're very busy today," she said loudly so other customers could hear. "Some people need to learn patience." Marcus felt his face getting warm with embarrassment, but he kept his voice calm and respectful. "I understand you're busy, but I just need to know how much longer it might be. I have a bus to catch." "Well, maybe you should have thought of that before coming in here," Jessica replied rudely. She turned to another customer and began taking their order, completely ignoring Marcus. An older gentleman sitting at a nearby table had been watching the entire interaction. He looked uncomfortable and whispered something to his wife. A few other customers were also starting to notice what was happening. Marcus felt all their eyes on him, and he wished he could just disappear. Marcus returned to his table and waited another 10 minutes. He was now genuinely worried about missing his bus and being late to see his family. He approached Jessica one more time, this time speaking quietly so as not to cause a scene. "Ma'am, I really need to leave soon. Could you please just bring me a cup of coffee to go? I'll pay for the full meal." Jessica slammed down the coffee pot she was holding. The loud noise made everyone in the diner turn to look. "Listen," she said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We don't serve your kind here. Why don't you go find somewhere else to eat?" The diner fell completely silent. Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had served his country faithfully for 12 years, had been deployed overseas 3 times and had always been proud to wear his uniform. Now this young woman was treating him like he was some kind of criminal. "I'm sorry, what do you say?" Marcus asked, hoping he had misunderstood. "You heard me," Jessica said, crossing her arms. "We don't want any military people in here. You guys think you're so special, but you're just trained killers. Find somewhere else to eat." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt his hands shaking slightly, not from anger but from hurt and disbelief. He had never experienced anything like this before. In all his years of service, he had always been treated with respect when he wore his uniform. Marcus looked around the diner. Some customers were staring at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others were looking at him with curiosity or pity. Nobody spoke up to defend him or challenge Jessica's behavior. With as much dignity as he could manage, Marcus picked up his military cap from the table and placed it carefully on his head. He straightened his uniform jacket and looked directly at Jessica. "I've served this country for 12 years, he said quietly but clearly. "I've never asked for special treatment, just basic respect. I'm sorry you feel that way about people like me." Marcus walked toward the door, his head held high despite the humiliation burning in his chest. As he reached for the door handle, he heard Jessica call out behind him, "And don't come back." The bell chimed as Marcus stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking deep breaths and trying to process what had just happened. His hunger was forgotten now, replaced by a deep sadness and confusion. As he walked toward the bus station, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Jessica's words. He thought about all the men and women he served with, good people who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. He thought about his friends who had made the ultimate sacrifice, who would never come home to their families. Marcus boarded the bus home, but the joy he had felt about seeing his family was now mixed with pain from this unexpected encounter. He stared out the window as the city passed by, wondering how someone could hate him simply for wearing the uniform he was so proud of. He didn't know it yet, but word of what happened at Betty's Diner was about to spread far beyond that small restaurant, and the consequences would be bigger than anyone could imagine. When Marcus finally arrived home that evening, Sarah could immediately tell something was wrong. She had been married to him for 10 years and knew every expression on his face. The moment he walked through the front door, she saw the sadness in his eyes that he was trying to hide behind a forced smile. "Daddy's home," Emma shouted, running to hug him. Marcus lifted his daughter into his arms and held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. For a moment, the warmth of his family pushed away the pain from earlier that day. "How was your trip, honey?" Sarah asked, giving him a welcome home kiss. "You look tired." "Just a long day," Marcus replied, not wanting to worry them with what had happened. "I missed you both so much." During dinner, Emma chatted excitedly about school, her friends, and the art project she was working on. Marcus listened carefully, asking questions and laughing at her funny stories. But Sarah noticed he was picking at his food and seemed distracted. After Emma went to bed, Sarah confronted him. "Okay, what really happened today?" she asked as they sat together on the couch. "And don't tell me it was just a long day." "I know you better than that." Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to burden Sarah with his problems, but he also knew she wouldn't let it go until he told her the truth. So he explained everything that had happened at the diner, from Jessica's cold attitude to her final cruel words. Sarah's face grew red with anger as he spoke. She said, "What? How dare she treat you that way? You should report this to someone." "This is discrimination." "Report it to who?" Marcus asked sadly. "It's not illegal for someone to be rude to a soldier. She has the right to her opinion even if it hurts." "No, Marcus, she doesn't have the right to humiliate you like that," Sarah said firmly. "You serve this country with honor. You deserve respect, not hatred." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her husband's hurt expression when he told her what happened. Marcus was one of the kindest, most honorable men she had ever known. He volunteered at the local children's hospital, helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and had never shown anything but compassion for others. The idea that someone could hate him simply for wearing his uniform made her furious. The next morning, after Marcus left for the base, Sarah made a decision. She called her friend Jennifer, whose husband also served in the military. Jennifer was shocked when Sarah told her what happened. "That's horrible," Jennifer said. "Tom would be devastated if something like that happened to him." "We need to do something about this, but what can we do?" Sarah asked. Marcus doesn't want to make a big deal out of it. Maybe Marcus doesn't want to make a big deal out of it, but we can't let this kind of behavior continue, Jennifer replied. What if this happens to other service members? What if someone treats Tom or one of his friends this way? Jennifer suggested they contact the military family support group at the base. The support group was run by Colonel Patricia Williams, a tough but caring woman who had been in the military for 25 years. She was known for standing up for service members and their families when they faced problems in the civilian community. That afternoon, Sarah and Jennifer met with Colonel Williams in her office. The colonel listened carefully as Sarah explained what had happened to Marcus. Her expression grew more serious with each detail. This is unacceptable, Colonel Williams said when Sarah finished. Sergeant Thompson is a decorated soldier who has served multiple tours overseas. No service member should be treated this way. But what can we do about it? Sarah asked. Marcus doesn't want any trouble. Colonel Williams smiled grimly. Sometimes, Sarah, good men like your husband need others to stand up for them when they won't stand up for themselves. Leave this with me. That evening, Colonel Williams called Marcus into her office. She had reviewed his service record and was even more impressed with his dedication and character. Marcus had received commendations for bravery, had volunteered for dangerous missions, and had never once complained about his assignments. Sergeant Thompson, the colonel said, I understand you had an unpleasant experience yesterday at a local establishment. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. With respect, ma'am, it's not something I want to pursue. I just want to move on. I appreciate your desire to let this go, Colonel Williams replied, but I want you to understand something. When someone disrespects you while you're wearing that uniform, they're not just disrespecting you personally. They're disrespecting every man and woman who has ever worn it, including those who died defending this country. Marcus had never thought about it that way before. He had been so focused on his own hurt feelings that he hadn't considered the bigger picture. What do you suggest, Colonel? He asked. I suggest we show this community what military service really means, she said. Not through anger or confrontation, but through action. Let them see who we really are. Meanwhile, word about what happened to Marcus was spreading throughout the base. Jennifer had told a few other military wives who told their husbands who told their friends. By Thursday morning, nearly everyone at the base had heard the story. Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez was particularly upset when he heard what happened. David had served with Marcus in Afghanistan and considered him one of the best soldiers he had ever known. Marcus had once risked his own life to pull David out of a damaged vehicle under enemy fire. This is ridiculous, David told his squad during their morning briefing. Marcus Thompson is a hero. He saved my life overseas and he gets treated like garbage at home? That's not right. Private Lisa Chen, who was new to the unit, raised her hand. What can we do about it, Sergeant? David thought for a moment. I don't know yet, but we need to do something. Marcus would do it for any of us. The story also reached Captain Michael Foster, who had been Marcus's commanding officer during their last deployment. Captain Foster remembered how Marcus had volunteered to stay behind and help evacuate civilians from a dangerous area, even though his own tour was supposed to be finished. By Thursday afternoon, Colonel Williams had received dozens of phone calls and visits from service members asking what they could do to support Marcus. Some were angry and wanted to confront the diner directly. Others suggested organizing a boycott of the business, but Colonel Williams had a different idea. She called a meeting for Friday morning with all the unit commanders on the base. When they gathered in the conference room, she presented her plan. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, one of our finest soldiers was humiliated simply for wearing his uniform. But instead of responding with anger, we're going to respond with dignity. We're going to show this community exactly what military service means. She outlined her plan, and by the end of the meeting, every commander was on board. Word quickly spread throughout the base about what they were going to do. Soldiers began making phone calls to friends at other bases. Military families started reaching out to their networks. Marcus had no idea what was being planned. He went about his normal duties, trying to put the incident behind him. But on Friday afternoon, Colonel Williams called him into her office again. Sergeant Thompson, she said, I want you to take the weekend off. Spend time with your family. Rest up. Is everything all right, ma'am? Marcus asked, confused by the unusual order. Everything is fine, the colonel replied with a mysterious smile. In fact, I think everything is about to be much better than fine. That evening, Marcus went home and told Sarah about his unexpected weekend off. Sarah just smiled and suggested they plan a nice family day for Saturday. She didn't tell him that she had already received 3 phone calls that day from people she had never met, all asking about what time everything would start on Saturday. As Marcus played with Emma in their backyard that Friday evening, he had no idea that his story had now spread to military bases across 3 states. He didn't know that hundreds of people were making plans for the next day. He couldn't imagine that his simple desire for a meal at a small diner was about to become something much bigger than he ever could have expected. The stage was set for Saturday morning, and Betty's diner was about to experience something they would never forget. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Marcus woke up feeling more relaxed than he had in days. He planned to take Emma to the park and maybe catch a movie with Sarah in the afternoon. As he made coffee in the kitchen, he had no idea that across the city, hundreds of people were already getting ready for what would become one of the most remarkable days in the town's history. At 6 in the morning, Colonel Williams was at the base coordinating with officers from 3 different military installations. Her phone had been ringing constantly since yesterday afternoon. Word about Marcus's treatment had spread through military networks faster than she had ever imagined possible. "Colonel, we have confirmation from Fort Henderson," reported Captain Foster. "They're sending 2 buses with about 60 personnel. Fort Madison is sending 45, and the National Guard unit from 3 counties over is sending 30. Colonel Williams nodded, checking her list. "And our people?" 123 confirmed from our base, ma'am. Plus family members, that brings us to over 200. The plan was simple but powerful. They would arrive at Betty's diner in full dress uniform, not to cause trouble or make demands, but simply to eat breakfast like any other customers. They would be polite, respectful, and demonstrate through their actions what military service really represented. Meanwhile, Jessica arrived at the diner that morning with no idea what was about to happen. She had worked there for 8 months and had developed a routine. Unlock the doors at 7, start the coffee, check the supplies, and get ready for the usual Saturday morning crowd of about 30 to 40 customers. Betty Morrison, the 60-year-old owner of the diner, was in the kitchen preparing for what she expected to be a normal weekend morning. Betty had inherited the restaurant from her parents and had been running it for 35 years. She was a kind woman who treated her employees fairly and her customers well. She had no idea about what Jessica had done to Marcus 3 days earlier. At 7:30, the first bus arrived. Jessica looked out the window and saw military personnel stepping off a large charter bus. She felt a knot form in her stomach but told herself it was probably just a coincidence. Maybe they were passing through town. Then the second bus arrived, and the third, and the fourth. Jessica watched in growing panic as uniformed service members began walking toward the diner. There were men and women of all ages, from young privates to senior officers with gray hair and rows of ribbons on their chests. Some came with their spouses and children. All of them were dressed in their finest uniforms with polished boots and perfectly pressed fabric. "Betty," Jessica called to the kitchen. "We have a situation out here." Betty came out from the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the crowd gathering outside her restaurant, her eyes widened in surprise. "What in the world?" The first group of service members entered the diner quietly and politely. Colonel Williams led the way, followed by Captain Foster and Sergeant Rodriguez. They removed their caps respectfully and waited to be seated. Jessica stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale with fear. She recognized what was happening but couldn't believe it was real. "Good morning," Colonel Williams said pleasantly to Jessica. "We'd like tables for about 300 people, please." 300? Jessica whispered. "Yes, we're having a little gathering," the colonel replied with a calm smile. "We heard this was a nice place for breakfast." Betty Morrison stepped forward, still confused but trying to be a good hostess. "I'm sorry, but we only have 15 tables. We can't possibly seat 300 people." "Oh, that's no problem," said Captain Foster. "We're used to waiting. Military people are very patient." Outside, more buses were arriving. The parking lot was filling up with people in uniform. Some carried American flags. Others held signs that read, "Support our troops" and "Honor and respect." But there was nothing aggressive about their behavior. They stood quietly, talking softly among themselves, waiting their turn. Local residents began to notice the unusual gathering. Cars slowed down as they passed the diner. People came out of their houses to see what was happening. Word spread quickly through the small town that hundreds of military personnel had gathered at Betty's diner. Inside the restaurant, the first group of service members had been seated at every available table. They studied their menus carefully and spoke politely to Jessica when she approached to take their orders. "I'll have 2 eggs over easy. Bacon and wheat toast," said one young soldier. "The pancakes look good," said another. "Yeah, I'll take a short stack with syrup." Jessica's hand shook as she wrote down their orders. She kept glancing toward the kitchen, hoping Betty would rescue her from this nightmare. But Betty was busy trying to figure out how to handle the crowd outside. Among the people waiting outside was Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the man whose life Marcus had saved in Afghanistan. He was talking to a group of younger soldiers, explaining why they were there. "Sergeant Thompson is one of the finest men I've ever served with," Rodriguez told them. "He risked his life to save mine overseas. When he came home, he should have been treated like the hero he is, not insulted and humiliated." A young female soldier raised her hand. "What exactly happened here, Sergeant?" Rodriguez explained the story, and the soldiers around him grew more determined with each detail. But their determination wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about showing the community what military service really meant. Back inside the diner, Betty Morrison was starting to understand that something significant was happening. She pulled Jessica aside in the kitchen. "Jessica, do you know anything about why all these military people are here?" Betty asked. Jessica's face crumpled and she started to cry. Through her tears, she confessed what she had done to Marcus 3 days earlier. She told Betty about refusing to serve him, about the cruel things she had said, and about how she had embarrassed him in front of other customers. Betty Morrison felt sick to her stomach. In 35 years of running the diner, she had never discriminated against anyone. Her own brother had served in Vietnam, and she had always supported the military. "Jessica, how could you do such a thing?" Betty asked, her voice filled with disappointment and anger. "I don't know," Jessica sobbed. "I was upset about something else, and I took it out on him. I know it was wrong." Betty looked out at the crowd of service members filling her restaurant and waiting patiently outside. She realized that these weren't angry protesters looking for trouble. They were professionals making a statement about respect and dignity. Meanwhile, local news crews had started arriving. A reporter from the town newspaper was interviewing Colonel Williams outside the diner. "Colonel, can you tell us why so many military personnel have gathered here today?" the reporter asked. "We're here to support one of our own," Colonel Williams replied calmly. A decorated soldier was treated poorly at this establishment, simply because he was wearing his uniform. "We want to show the community what military service really represents: honor, respect, and dignity." "Are you planning any kind of protest or demonstration?" "Not at all," the colonel answered. "We're just here to have breakfast like any other customers. We believe in leading by example, not by confrontation." Inside the diner, the atmosphere was tense but polite. The service members were ordering food, making quiet conversation, and treating the staff with courtesy despite what had happened. Some of them left generous tips, even though their service was slow due to the overwhelming crowd. Jessica was struggling to keep up with the orders, and her guilt was making everything worse. Every time she looked at the uniformed men and women, she thought about what she had done to Marcus. She wondered if any of these people knew him personally, if they had served with him, if they were here because they cared about him. Betty Morrison made a decision. She walked over to Colonel Williams, who was sitting at a table near the window. "Colonel, I need to speak with you privately," Betty said quietly. They stepped outside, away from the crowd and the news cameras. "Colonel, my employee Jessica has told me what happened here 3 days ago with one of your soldiers," Betty said. "I want you to know that her behavior does not represent the values of this restaurant. I am deeply sorry for what occurred." Colonel Williams studied Betty's face and could see that her regret was genuine. "Thank you for saying that, ma'am. It means a great deal. Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Betty asked. Colonel Williams thought for a moment. "Actually, there is something. But it would require you to trust us, and it would require genuine change, not just words." "Whatever it takes," Betty said firmly. As the morning progressed, the crowd outside continued to grow. More buses arrived from military bases throughout the region. Local television stations sent news crews. The story was starting to spread beyond the small town, reaching social media and national news networks. But through it all, the service members maintained their dignity and composure. They weren't there to cause trouble or seek revenge. They were there to honor their fellow soldier and to demonstrate the true meaning of military service. The stage was set for what would become an unforgettable moment of reconciliation and understanding. But first, there was someone very important who needed to be there to see it. While hundreds of service members gathered at Betty's diner, Marcus was completely unaware of what was happening. He was at the park with Emma, pushing her on the swings and enjoying a peaceful Saturday morning with his daughter. Sarah had suggested they go out early, saying she wanted to run some errands and would meet them later. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah was actually at the diner. Standing with the crowd of military families who had come to support her husband, she watched with amazement as the peaceful demonstration continued to grow. There were now over 400 people gathered, and news vans from 3 different television stations had arrived. Colonel Williams received a text message on her phone and smiled. "He's on his way," she announced to Captain Foster. At exactly 10:30 in the morning, Sarah had called Marcus with a simple request. "Honey, could you and Emma meet me at Betty's diner? I'm having coffee with some friends, and I'd love for you both to join us." Marcus hesitated. "Betty's diner? Sarah, that's where I had the problem the other day. I'd rather not go back there." "Please, Marcus," Sarah said gently. "Trust me on this. It's important." Something in his wife's voice told Marcus this wasn't a casual request. "All right, we'll be there in 20 minutes. As Marcus and Emma drove toward the diner, he began to notice something unusual. There were more cars than normal on the roads leading to that part of town. He saw several military vehicles and buses, which struck him as odd for a Saturday morning. When they turned the corner toward Betty's diner, Marcus couldn't believe what he saw. The entire parking lot was filled with people in military uniforms. There were news cameras and reporters interviewing people. American flags were flying and the crowd stretched down the block. "Daddy, what's happening?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Marcus sat in his car, staring at the scene in complete shock. He recognized many of the uniforms and faces. These were people from his base, from other bases, people he had served with over the years. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he tried to process what he was seeing. Then he spotted Sarah standing near the front of the crowd. She saw his car and began walking toward him with a huge smile on her face. Behind her came Colonel Williams, Captain Foster, and Sergeant Rodriguez. Marcus got out of the car slowly, still in disbelief. Emma held his hand tightly, sensing that something very important was happening even though she didn't understand what it was. "Marcus," Sarah said, reaching for his other hand, "all of these people came here for you." "For me?" Marcus whispered. "I don't understand." Colonel Williams stepped forward. "Sergeant Thompson, what happened to you here 3 days ago was unacceptable. When word spread about how you were treated, people wanted to respond. But instead of responding with anger, we decided to respond with dignity." Marcus looked around at the sea of faces. He saw young privates he had helped train, experienced sergeants he had served alongside, and officers who had commanded him. He saw families with children, elderly veterans, and people he had never met but who wore the same uniform he was proud of. "All of these people came here because of what happened to me," Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. "They came here because you represent something important," Captain Foster explained. "You represent all of us. When someone disrespects you for wearing this uniform, they disrespect every person who has ever worn it." Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, the man whose life Marcus had saved in Afghanistan. "Marcus, you saved my life overseas. When I heard what happened to you here at home, I knew we had to do something. But we didn't come here for revenge. We came here to show this community who we really are." Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, are all these people your friends?" Marcus looked down at his daughter and then back at the crowd. Many of the people were now looking in his direction, and when they saw him, they began to applaud. It started slowly with just a few people, but soon the entire crowd of over 400 was clapping for him. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had never experienced anything like this before. The pain and humiliation he had felt 3 days earlier was being replaced by an overwhelming sense of support and belonging. Betty Morrison had been watching from inside the diner, and when she saw Marcus arrive, she knew what she had to do. She walked outside and approached the group. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "Are you Sergeant Thompson?" Marcus nodded, not sure what to expect. Betty's voice shook as she spoke. I am the owner of this restaurant and I want to apologize to you from the bottom of my heart. What my employee did to you was wrong, and it does not represent the values of this establishment or this community." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I would be honored if you and your family would be my guest for breakfast today. And I want everyone here to know that service members will always be welcome in my restaurant." The crowd erupted in applause again. Marcus was overwhelmed by the gesture, but he could see that Betty's apology was sincere. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "That means a great deal to me." But Colonel Williams wasn't finished yet. She had one more surprise planned. "Sergeant Thompson," the colonel announced loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "in recognition of your years of dedicated service and your gracious response to adversity, I have some news to share." She pulled out an official-looking document. "Your promotion to Staff Sergeant has been approved effective immediately. Congratulations, Staff Sergeant Thompson." The crowd cheered even louder. Marcus was stunned. He had been hoping for this promotion for months, but he had no idea it was coming today. Sarah squeezed his hand and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Emma jumped up and down with excitement, even though she didn't fully understand what was happening. She just knew that her daddy was being celebrated by a lot of important people. As the ceremony continued, something beautiful began to happen inside the diner. Jessica, who had been watching everything from the window, finally found the courage to face what she had done. She walked outside and approached Marcus directly. The crowd grew quiet as they sensed something important was about to happen. "Sergeant Thompson," Jessica said, her voice barely audible, "I'm the waitress who treated you so badly 3 days ago." Marcus looked at the young woman standing before him. She was clearly terrified and filled with regret. "I want to apologize to you in front of all these people," Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger. "What I did was wrong, and it came from my own ignorance and anger about things that had nothing to do with you. You didn't deserve to be treated that way, and I'm deeply sorry." The crowd waited to see how Marcus would respond. This was a moment that would define not just his character, but the character of everyone present. Marcus looked at Jessica for a long moment. Then he extended his hand to her. "Thank you for your apology," he said with genuine kindness. "I accept it and I forgive you." Jessica broke down in tears, overwhelmed by his grace and forgiveness. Several people in the crowd were wiping their eyes as well, but the most powerful moment was yet to come. Betty Morrison stepped forward with a proposal that would turn this day into something even more meaningful than anyone had imagined. "I have an idea," Betty announced to the crowd. "If you're all willing, I'd like to make this a regular event. The first Saturday of every month, I want to offer free breakfast to any service member or veteran who wants to come. I want this place to become known as somewhere military families are always welcome." The crowd erupted in the loudest applause yet. What had started as a response to one act of disrespect was turning into an ongoing celebration of military service and community support. Marcus looked around at all the faces surrounding him. His family, his fellow service members, his community. The pain from 3 days ago was completely gone, replaced by gratitude and pride that he would remember for the rest of his life. But this remarkable day was far from over. The story was about to spread far beyond this small town, and the impact would reach places that none of them could have imagined. As the crowd at Betty's diner celebrated Marcus's promotion and Betty's generous offer, news cameras were broadcasting the story live across the region. Within hours, the video clips and photos from the gathering were spreading across social media platforms at an incredible speed. The images were powerful. Hundreds of service members in pristine uniforms, standing peacefully together in support of one of their own. The sight of Marcus accepting Jessica's apology with grace and dignity resonated with people far beyond the military community. By noon, the hashtag Support Staff Sergeant Thompson was trending on social media. People from across the country were sharing the story and commenting on what they saw as a perfect example of honor, forgiveness, and community spirit. News stations in major cities began picking up the story. The footage of Colonel Williams promoting Marcus in front of the cheering crowd made the evening news in 12 states. The image of Marcus shaking hands with Jessica as she apologized became an iconic symbol of reconciliation, but the story was having an even bigger impact than anyone realized. At military bases across the country, service members were watching the news coverage with tears in their eyes. Many of them had experienced similar treatment in civilian establishments, but they had suffered in silence, not wanting to cause trouble. At Fort Braxton in North Carolina, Master Sergeant Angela Davis was watching the news in the base recreation center with a group of soldiers. She had been in the military for 18 years and had faced her share of discrimination and disrespect. I wish I had people like that supporting me when I was refused service at that restaurant in Tennessee, she said, quietly. You do have people like that, replied Sergeant Major Jackson, who had been listening nearby. We all do. We just needed to see it to believe it. Similar conversations were happening at military installations around the world. In Germany, soldiers at a U.S. base watched the story online and talked about starting their own support networks. In Japan, military families discussed ways to strengthen their community bonds. The story even reached deployed troops overseas. In Afghanistan, soldiers gathered around computers in their recreation tent to watch the videos from Betty's Diner. Many of them knew Marcus personally or had served with people who knew him. That's what we're fighting for, said one young soldier. The right to come home to a country that respects and supports us. Back at Betty's Diner, the celebration was continuing into the afternoon. True to her word, Betty had prepared free meals for everyone who wanted them. The diner's small kitchen was overwhelmed, so local restaurants and food trucks had volunteered to help feed the crowd. Emma Thompson was having the time of her life. She was being treated like a celebrity by the other military children present, and several officers had given her junior officer pins and patches for her collection. She kept asking her father to explain why so many people were there for him. Sometimes, sweetheart, Marcus told her, when something bad happens to someone, good people come together to make it right. All these people came here to show that they care about our family and about treating others with respect. As the afternoon progressed, more local residents began arriving. Many of them had seen the news coverage and wanted to show their support for the military families in their community. The mayor of the town arrived and gave a short speech, thanking the service members for their dedication. Local business owners came with offers of their own. The hardware store owner announced that military families would receive a 10% discount on all purchases. The movie theater manager offered free tickets for military children every Saturday. The local car dealership promised special pricing for service members. What had started as a response to one incident of disrespect was transforming into a community-wide celebration of military service and mutual support. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when an elderly man in a veteran's cap slowly made his way through the crowd toward Marcus. He was using a walker and appeared to be in his 80s. The crowd parted respectfully as he approached. Son, the old veteran said to Marcus, I served in Korea 60 years ago. When I came home, I faced some of the same treatment you experienced here. I want you to know that seeing all these people come together for you gives me hope for our country. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn military medal. This is my Bronze Star, he said. I want you to have it, not because you need another medal, but because you represent the best of what military service means. Marcus was overwhelmed. Sir, I can't accept this. You earned this medal, and now you're earning yours every day, the veteran replied. Take it, son. It belongs with someone who understands its value. As Marcus accepted the medal, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. The image of the young soldier receiving the Bronze Star from the elderly veteran perfectly captured the continuity of military service across generations. The news crews captured this moment as well, and it became another powerful image that spread across the internet. Veterans organizations began sharing the story, and it resonated deeply with millions of former service members who had faced similar challenges when transitioning back to civilian life. By evening, the story had reached national television networks. News anchors were discussing the power of positive response to discrimination and the importance of supporting military families. Social commentators praised the dignified way the military community had handled the situation. Phone calls began pouring into Betty's Diner from around the country. Restaurant owners wanted to know how they could show similar support for military families in their communities. Veterans groups were asking for details about the monthly breakfast program Betty had announced. A prominent national veterans organization called to offer funding to help expand the monthly breakfast program. A major food service company volunteered to provide supplies. Local farmers offered to donate fresh produce. What Betty had intended as a simple gesture of apology was growing into something much larger than she had ever imagined. That evening, as the crowd finally began to disperse, Marcus stood with his family outside the diner where his ordeal had begun just 4 days earlier. The building looked the same, but everything else had changed completely. "How do you feel, honey?" Sarah asked, taking his arm. Marcus looked around at the few remaining groups of service members who were saying their goodbyes and making plans to return for the first monthly breakfast. He thought about Jessica's sincere apology, Betty's generous offer, and the incredible outpouring of support from people he had never even met. "I feel grateful," he said simply. "3 days ago I was hurt and confused. Today I'm reminded of why I'm proud to wear this uniform and why I'm proud to serve alongside people like these." Emma, who was exhausted but still excited, tugged on her father's uniform jacket.
"Daddy, will all these people come back next month?"
"Some of them will, sweetheart," Marcus replied. "And probably some new ones too." As they walked to their car, Marcus had no idea that the story was just beginning. The events at Betty's Diner were about to inspire similar gatherings in dozens of other cities. The movement that had started with one man's simple desire for a meal was about to become something that would change how communities across America thought about supporting their military families. The ripple effects of this day would continue to spread, touching lives and communities in ways that none of them could have predicted. 6 months later, the first Saturday in March arrived with unseasonably warm weather. Betty's Diner was bustling with activity as volunteers, prepared for what had become known as Military Appreciation Breakfast. What had started as Betty's simple gesture of apology had grown into a nationwide movement. Marcus arrived early that morning, not as a guest but as one of the volunteer coordinators. In the months since the original gathering, he had become the unofficial liaison between the military community and local businesses. His promotion to staff sergeant had been followed by an assignment to community relations, where his natural diplomacy and the respect he had earned made him perfect for the role. "Morning, Marcus," called Betty as she unlocked the front door. At 71, she had more energy than people half her age. The success of the monthly breakfast had revitalized both her business and her spirit. "Are you ready for another big crowd?" "Bigger than ever, I think," Marcus replied, checking his list. "We've got confirmations from 4 states this time. The bus company donated 3 extra coaches just to handle the transportation. The monthly gatherings had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What started with 400 people had expanded to over 1,500 regular attendees. The event had outgrown Betty's small diner long ago, but she insisted on keeping it centered there. The town had embraced the gathering, with local businesses opening their doors and the high school gymnasium serving as an overflow dining area. Jessica arrived for her shift, wearing her uniform with pride. In the months since her public apology to Marcus, she had undergone a complete transformation. She had enrolled in college courses to study social work, inspired by the forgiveness and grace she had witnessed that day. She had also become one of the most dedicated volunteers for the monthly events. "Jessica, could you help me set up the memorial table?" asked Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman whose son had been killed in Iraq 5 years earlier. Mrs. Patterson had become a regular volunteer after seeing the first news reports about the gathering. The memorial table had become one of the most meaningful parts of each monthly breakfast. Families brought photos of service members who had died in combat, and the table served as a place of remembrance and honor. It reminded everyone why supporting military families was so important. As the morning progressed, buses began arriving from military bases across the region. But these weren't just military personnel anymore. The gatherings had attracted veterans from all wars, military families, and civilians who wanted to show their support. Gold Star families, whose loved ones had made the ultimate sacrifice, were always given places of honor. Colonel Williams, now retired but still a driving force behind the events, arrived with a group of wounded veterans from the VA hospital. The monthly breakfasts had become an important part of their healing process, providing them with a sense of community and purpose. "Marcus, I have some news," the colonel said, pulling him aside. "The Secretary of Defense wants to visit next month's breakfast. This little gathering of ours has caught the attention of some very important people in Washington." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "Sometimes I can't believe all this started because I wanted a cup of coffee and some meatloaf. But the impact had spread far beyond government officials and military circles. The story had inspired similar monthly gatherings in over 200 cities across America. Restaurant owners, community leaders, and military families had replicated Betty's model, creating a network of support that reached into every state. Emma Thompson, now 9 years old, had become something of a celebrity at the events. She helped serve meals alongside her parents and had even started a program where military children could earn junior volunteer badges. She was proud of her father's role in starting what she called the Big Breakfast family. "Daddy, look," Emma called out, pointing to a news van pulling into the parking lot. "The TV people are here again." Media coverage of the monthly events had never stopped. The story had been featured in national magazines, documentary films, and even a children's book about kindness and forgiveness. But Marcus had learned to handle the attention with the same grace he had shown that first day. As the breakfast officially began, Marcus stood before the crowd to give his monthly welcome. Over the months, he had become an accomplished speaker, though he still felt nervous before addressing such large groups. "6 months ago, I walked into this diner feeling hurt and unwelcome," he began. "Today I look out at all of you and see the best of what America can be. We've shown that the response to hatred and disrespect shouldn't be more hatred, but understanding, forgiveness, and positive action." The crowd applauded, but Marcus wasn't finished. "I've received letters from military families around the world telling me how these gatherings have changed their lives. I've heard from restaurant owners who've started their own support programs. I've met veterans who found community again after years of isolation. This is bigger than any one person or any one incident. This is about who we choose to be as a people." In the audience, there were faces from that original day 6 months ago, but also many new ones. A young Marine who had recently returned from deployment sat with his parents, who had driven 8 hours to attend. A World War II veteran in a wheelchair was surrounded by his grandchildren, who were learning about service and sacrifice. A Gold Star mother held a photo of her son while volunteers made sure she felt honored and supported. The diversity of the crowd reflected the true scope of what had grown from that difficult day in September. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds had come together around a shared belief in respect, dignity, and support for those who serve. As breakfast was served, Marcus walked among the tables, checking on guests and volunteers. He stopped at a table where a young soldier sat alone, looking nervous and out of place. "First time here?" Marcus asked, sitting down across from the soldier. "Yes, sir. I just got stationed here last week. I heard about this breakfast but wasn't sure if I should come." "What's your name, soldier?" "Private Rodriguez, sir. I'm actually related to Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, who was here that first day. He's my uncle, and he told me I had to come see what this was all about." Marcus smiled. "Your uncle is a good man. He helped make all this possible. Welcome to the family, Private Rodriguez." As they talked, Marcus remembered his own early days in the military, when he was young and uncertain about his place in the world. The sense of belonging and support that these gatherings provided was exactly what young soldiers like Private Rodriguez needed. The morning continued with speeches from local officials, presentations to outstanding military families, and the reading of names from the memorial table. But the most important part was simply the opportunity for people to connect, to share stories, and to feel appreciated. As the event wound down, Betty Morrison approached Marcus with a proposal she had been considering for weeks. "Marcus, I've been thinking about expanding this even further," she said. "What if we started a foundation? We could help other communities start their own support programs, provide scholarships for military children, and maybe even help with emergency assistance for military families in need." Marcus was intrigued. "That's a wonderful idea, Betty. What would you need to make it happen?" "Mainly, I'd need someone with your credibility and passion to help lead it," she replied. "Would you be interested in being the foundation's first president?" Marcus thought about the opportunity. In the 6 months since that difficult day at the diner, he had discovered a passion for community building and support that he never knew he had. The idea of expanding their impact to help military families across the country was incredibly appealing. "I'd be honored," he said, as families began saying their goodbyes and making plans for next month's gathering. Marcus stood outside the diner with Sarah and Emma. The building that had once been a source of pain and humiliation had become a symbol of hope and community. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," Emma said, holding his hand. "You helped make all these people happy." We all did, sweetheart, Marcus replied. Sometimes the best things come from the worst situations if we choose to respond with love instead of hate. Sarah squeezed his other hand. So what's next for us? Marcus looked at the crowd of people still lingering in the parking lot, reluctant to end another meaningful gathering. He thought about Private Rodriguez and all the other young service members who needed support and community. He thought about the foundation Betty had proposed and all the good they could do together. I think we're just getting started, he said with a smile. As the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, the last of the buses pulled away from Betty's diner. But the impact of what had happened there would continue to spread, touching lives and building communities for years to come. What had started with one man's simple desire for a meal had become a powerful reminder that the best response to hatred is love, the best response to division is unity, and the best response to hurt is healing. The story of Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson and Betty's diner had become more than just a tale of military support. It had become a testament to the power of forgiveness, the importance of community, and the incredible things that can happen when good people choose to stand together for what's right. And in